with our friend Dr. Ibrahim Bahreldin, and his interesting topic will be about voice and voiceless, a participatory youth-driven foresight for Great Khartoum. Dr. Ibrahim is basically, he's recently a faculty at Faculty of Architecture and Planning at King Abdulaziz University. He's an architect and urbanist and educator. His educational background through his master, undergrad, and PhD focused more in architecture, human settlements, and urban design, and how this really can affect the people's life. He got his bachelor from University of Khartoum, as well as his master. He got his PhD from Japan, Tokyo. He has amazing experience and exercise did for placemaking and urban design with the community in Tokyo. Dr. Bahreldin has more than 15 years teaching, work on research, and practical experience in the field of urban design, planning, and human settlements. Please, Dr. Bahreldin, the mic is yours now. Welcome, and let's start. So we have around like 25 minutes. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Adil. I will do my best to finalize in 25 minutes. Just, I hope everyone will help me with that. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Let me just share my screen here. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you for having me. In fact, it's a great pleasure for me and honor to be among these wonderful groups of placemakers. And I'm very happy to be presenting one of the cases that I think has to do with what placemaking is all about, but it also has to do with looking at the minority groups in a certain context. And by minority groups, I'm talking about the youth as well as the youth that are coming from some areas that are, in a way, are marginalized. The work that I'm presenting today has been commissioned to one of my colleagues, Dr. Jamal Mahmoud, and myself, by a very reputable NGO in Khartoum in Sudan. It's a Sudanese Environmental Conservation Society. The work has been done in collaboration with the University of Khartoum, and it was part of a special program called Sustainable Neighborhood. This program was funded by the European Union. Just as an entry point, allow me to begin my presentation by providing some details on two of the motives behind the whole idea of this project. The first one has to do with why do we look at involving the youth? Why involving the youth in planning is very important. And if we look at the state of the youth in Arab world, we see that about 20% of the Arab people in the Arab region is between 15 and 24 years old. And in Africa, that's even much higher. We will look at the figures in Sudan very soon. In fact, more than 50% of the population in Arab region is below the age of 25. So when we consider this and we localize these numbers into Sudan, we see that about 62% is counted for the young people in the total population. Young people in Sudan, they have been actively participating in shaping and reshaping the country future. We know that the youth were actually the trigger for the recent December revolution that outsetted one of the strongest dictatorship, I think, in the world. But unfortunately, 20% of these youth are unemployed. And despite that the youth are participating in many ways in the social and cultural life of Sudan, they have been actually very much excluded in the planning process. And for this reason, the potential of many of the youth are not very much exploited and utilized. In fact, many of the young people, many of the young generations, the students, and now are considering migration as a way out because, you know, they feel like they're being left behind, they're not very much included. And to me, what you see in the image here is that the participation itself happens in many ways, and even in the ways that's not really possible, not really positive to the country future, which is most of the military struggles that are happening in the country is being actually fueled by the youth themselves. So there's a lot of potentials that are not exploited, and that has raised the question of why we have the need to involve the youth. Also, when it comes to urban planning, the youth are neither involved in the planning process nor in the policy making. In fact, the country itself lacks a policy for youth involvement, and thus has been manifested in the poor involvement in many of the processes. In fact, the participation as a process itself is not very much grounded into Sudanese urban planning. What I'm showing now is the 5 development plans that has been initiated for the city of Khartoum, which is the capital region. And if we look at the last row, it's always that planning is not really considering public participation. And even the last structure plan, the 2008-2020-33, public participation was very limited and wasn't considering the point of views from different sectors and different people. So despite the enthusiasm, power, and ability to change of the youth are frequently marginalized in the planning process, and their voices are not included. This is the first motive. The second motive has to do with the opportunities that are given to us, and by that I mean to me, in fact, as a student as well as a participant in many of the planning projects in Japan. I consider myself was very lucky that I was educated and trained in a university and a laboratory as well that values community participation. And the image that I'm showing here is part of the projects that we did while I was doing my PhD in Japan. This is one of the areas that has been characterized as least developed areas in Tokyo, which is under threat by tsunami as well as the earthquake. So the project that you see here is basically building a master plan for the improvement of the area using community participation as a tool. And what you see here is a participatory analysis. So we try to use the kids and utilize the knowledge of the space and the area to provide a clear analysis of the challenges and the problems that's facing them there. Also, the project extended into the elders, and we utilize planning for real model and participatory mapping to look at the different aspects of community challenges. And what you see in the photo here is also a part of the community, part of the elders in the community, together with my colleagues and my lab mates. And the project also extended into the process of a neighborhood walk. So we work together with the community around the city, and we map actually where are the challenges, and then we try to come together and work with the community to develop some solution for these challenges. The work extended also into schools. So we visited many schools, many universities, and we tried to look at the students and how they envision the cities. And together with them, we tried also to develop what we call it citizen-made master plans. So it's by them, and as they develop these proposals, using their own language. So the language itself that we use is not the professional language that we know, but in fact, we use the language that the kids and the laypersons understand. And a part of that process includes the cognitive maps to illustrate their perception of the public space. It also includes the places that they like the most and places that they don't like. So it impacts how we envision the future of those places. The second part of this motive has also to do with the research that that I have done, which is part of my PhD also. It has to do with participatory evaluation of planning interventions in the cities. This is a proposal or a project that I did in 2010 in one of the areas in South Khartoum. It's called the Shigla. Basically, it's a participatory evaluation of how the city will function after the replanning process. And another project also has to do with participation, and I was very happy to be part of this project. The project was initiated by late Dr. Bushra Taib. He is my professor and a friend as well, passed a couple of years ago, but the project that he initiated was called The City in Their Eyes, the city in the eyes of the kids. And this project was an initiative between the Center of Urban Studies in the University of Khartoum, as well as a couple of private institutions, but they work very much in community development. So the idea was to look at the kids and to help the kids to envision the cities that they live in through extracurricular activities that has been added to the kids' learning process. So the most of the activities that happens were actually initiated and also coordinated with the Ministry of Education through various schools within the educational system in Khartoum. So our work in this project was instructed by the two motives I just presented. The one that has to do with little involvement of the youth in the planning process. And the second one has to do with the opportunities that we can actually gain through looking at the public participation in the planning process. And to approach this project innovatively, I think we need to think about the way to draw the future for the city. We have to think differently, especially when it comes to the future, because the youth are the future. And in most of the cases, some people who are not really going to attend the future are actually planning the future for those youth. So the best way to do this is to let the youth think for themselves. And this is what we try to look at. And also, the youth will be affected by today's decision. So the idea is to let those who will be affected do the thinking for themselves and envision the city the way they like it. So the idea or the objective of the whole project was to develop alternative participatory vision. And by the term alternative, we meant that this vision is generated by the youth. It's just a vision, it's not a plan. So it's an introductory to how we look at the city, how the youth envisions the city. And if we look at the strategic decision-making processes, the vision is always at the center of the planning process. So you need to have a vision instead before you proceed to the planning process. And the most interesting part of this is that such a vision is based on the city future inhabitants, which are the youth. So the vision itself was generated by the youth. The methodology is structured into 4 parts, but the part that has to do with this presentation is the fourth one, because the project was actually bigger than the topic of this presentation. So I'm just presenting the last part, which has to do with mapping environmental visions of a sample of young generations, I mean by that youth, and future residents of Greater Khartoum. So we tried to look at as the workshop participants, we tried to sample and create a sampling for the participant. So we selected 3 different groups, basically the public schools for the boys, public schools for the girls, and public universities. The standard that we use is that because the project is stationed in Khartoum, so all these people has to be in Khartoum. We selected 6 different schools within Khartoum through communication with the Ministry of Education. And we have been advised by the ministry that these schools has to be part of the model schools. But our attention was more focused on looking at the schools in remote areas, schools in low income and migrant communities. And we managed actually to include 2 of the schools that are actually aligning with this description. We also look at schools from public universities, and we look at students from 6 public universities from different disciplines that related to architecture, planning, environmental studies. We looked at students at the last 3 stages of their education. So the third year, the 4th year, and the 5th year students. So collectively, we combine all these youth together to try to envision how they see their city in the future. And we did that through the participative workshop. So we did 3 workshops, each for each one of the 3 groups. So we did one workshop for the high school students, the boys, and then another one for the girls, and another one for the university students. And the objectives that we explain to the participants is that the first one is to identify major environmental challenges facing the city of Khartoum and the capital region. And then we ask them to prioritize those environmental challenges that they looked at. And after that, we ask them to map environmental sensitive vision for the greater Khartoum, for the city of Khartoum. And then the last one is to define and identify strategies for implementing such vision. As I mentioned earlier, the idea was focused very much into drawing the vision itself. So we're not trying to provide a real plan, rather we're just trying to look at how they envision the cities, and we try to help the participants in that. So our role in the process was basically a facilitator, as well as in sometimes, but not always, was a mediator. And through this role, we designed the participatory workshops into several stages. The first one was the orientation stage. The orientation stage is the stage in which we actually present the objective of this meeting, provided that the students and the youth are coming from different sectors. So most of them, they don't know each other at the beginning. So the orientation stage includes details about the importance of the workshop, the objectives of the workshop, and what we expected to see from this workshop. The second part, or the second session, was the ice-breaking stage, which we tried actually to get the youth to know each other, to get acquainted with each other. It includes introducing themselves to each other, but in some cases, particularly I'm talking about the case of the high school students, it includes actually some sort of participatory game. And then the third stage was the investigation stage, in which the youth work together to try to look at the urban challenges that are facing the city, but at the same time, to try also to look at the vision, which is the 4th stage. So they try to draw a vision for the city of Khartoum. And then the last stage was the learning stage, in which all participants communicated the outcomes of their discussions to the other participants. And then it was the learning stage, which each one learned from others through the presentations that they provide and through the comments and the questions that they ask to each other. The modes of communication which we utilize through the workshops were basically related to how they can express their ideas. So the first one was the written statement. So we allowed the youth to write their statements. The second one has to do with the verbal communication. So they communicate verbally about what they want or what their expectations are. And then the last one was through sketches. And the last one, honestly, was the toughest one, because in most of the high school education, art itself is not very much grounded in the education itself. So the students have found it really difficult to express their ideas through sketches. But I think we were very lucky because we understand most of these sketches that they actually develop. So basically the workshops has 3 components, as I mentioned earlier. The first one has to do with the environmental challenges facing the city of Khartoum. The second one has to do with developing the vision itself. And the third one has to do with the tools to achieve such vision. And I will go through these 3 processes one by one. So as for the first process, which has to do with defining the environmental challenges for the city of Khartoum, the participants has managed to list 11 key environmental challenges. And these environmental challenges, if you look at them, they are really very much grounded into the city. And personally, I was very much astonished that they managed to look at these environmental challenges and urban planning challenges in a very deep way, including the high school students. So they managed to list issues that has to do with pollution, with a different kind of pollution, challenges that has to do with sewage and drainage system, challenges that has to do with waste management, others has to do with the lack of green coverage and infrastructure, as well as sustainable transportation, water quality, growing city population, drought and desertification, and CO2 emissions. So the groups of stakeholders and the youth has really managed to highlight a lot of key challenges that's facing the city. And what we did is we tried to communicate with them and to discuss with them. And we managed to put all these challenges into 3 groups. The first group has to do with policy making challenges. And the second group has to do with the planning intervention challenges. And the third one has to do with the infrastructure management challenges. So the whole challenges that they listed were grouped into these 3 components. The second part of the workshop has to do with developing the vision. And personally, we were very much interested on this part, because this is the part where we try to look at how they envision the future city. And I'll be giving some examples of the outcomes that come out from the students. This is one of the visions that is being drawn by the students and the youth in the first workshop. This proposal envisions city as my home. It's looking at the city of Khartoum as my home. And if you see, it's like the door is, Khartoum is characterized by the confluence of the Blue and the White Nile. So it's like the door. So when you enter Khartoum, you enter your big home at the country level. So this vision imagines Khartoum as inclusive city for all Sudanese. It's also endorses the principles of social justice and the justice of place. The second vision, it looks at what we call it as the triple C, and this was produced in the third workshop. Basically, it looks at reduce, reuse, and recycle waste. It was very technical proposal and vision, but the proposal itself looks at 2 other issues: the issue of walkability and generating public streets and walkable streets, as well as try to look at Sudanese identity by looking at public spaces and public streets that reflects actually the Sudanese identity. The third vision, the third vision is surprisingly the only vision that was developed in this workshop that looks at the city at the regional level. I mean surprisingly because most of the interventions that we noticed coming from the youth were very much generated at the local level. And I mean by that the neighborhood level more or less. But this is the only vision that looks at the city of Khartoum at the regional level. It looks at trying to generate sustainable transportation mode by utilizing the water, the River Nile, the Blue Nile, and the White Nile as transportation system, as well as looking at connecting also the rail system into the land transportation. So creating a sort of a cohesive system of transportation. It's also look at multiple city centers by trying to develop city centers that are culturally different, but very much integrated through transportation. As well as the last point is the centrality of the Nile as the main urban development corridor. So Khartoum is branded by the confluence of the two Niles. So the Nile itself as being as the center of the main development. And then I will look at this vision, which is actually my favorite vision. This vision is developed by a student who's living in one of the remote areas in Khartoum. It's called Mayo. It's to the south of the city. And he's originally from Nuba Mountains, south of Sudan. So he's from a low income neighborhood, as well as coming from areas that is terribly hit by the civil war in Sudan. What we see in this, and it took me quite a while to understand it, so I had to communicate with the student. But the student is envisioning here that we need to have a city that with a clean environment, a city that has a very decent level of walkability. But most importantly, and that's the thing that I learned from this proposal, is the process of using the edible landscape. To me, at the time of the workshop, the concept of edible landscape itself was new to me. So I learned really very much from this proposal, because it was very educative and a learning experience from me. So the student was trying to look at these all issues together at the same time. And the concept of edible landscape is becoming now actually a very important concept in the planning process, especially with the current problems and challenges that we face with food security and water shortages that is striking hardly the whole world. And the last vision that I'll be presenting has to do with also one of the visions that has been developed in the first workshop. And this vision basically look at, try to respect the human scale in street design and in city design by trying to look carefully at the scale of street. It also looks at trying to create multiple centers that we can use to look at the city with a maximum walking distance that allows everyone to walk freely in the city itself. This vision also focuses on public space design, and it also looks at the relationship between public spaces and streets. So in a nutshell, and let me just conclude the visions that I have just presented. The visions range from different regions, different perspectives, as well as different levels of planning. Let me just share a small summary. It's a video of 1.5 minutes, which includes all the visions that's developed by the students. Seems there's no sound, right? I'm not hearing any sound.
Yeah, there is no sound, Dr. Bahreldin.
Okay, just a minute.
عددنا ده ذاك كفي. الفيديو بتاعتنا طلعنا بها الليله انه الخرطوم
It's working?
Now, yeah, the voice is clear, yes.
Okay.
Yep.
الفيجن بتاعتنا طلعنا بها الليلة إنه الخرطوم ما يكون مدينتي أو بيتي أو حاجة عزيزة علي. إحنا ما قدرنا نتطرق لإنه عملنا شنو في الديزاين وفي البلانينج والحاجات والسنتر بتاع المواصلات دي مشاكل كبيرة. يعني الزمن ما بكفي ولا نحن في يعني عددنا ده ذاته بكفي. داير اللجان عشان تقعد تاخذ خطة زي كيف تصلح الخرطوم. الحاجة اللي دايرين نطلع بها الليلة نحن من الحاجة دي إنه نحن نشوف شنو أو عايزين شنو بعد 30 سنة.
يعني مواد متطورة يكون عندنا رمزية بسيطة في شكل الديزاين تعكس الهوية أو الثقافة السورية.
فالفيلم بيتكلم عنه إنه عشان تزيد الحميمية بتاعت المدينة إنه يتم سنترز أصغر وبعد كده كله بيتكلم عن أحزمة الخضراء وكده إنه بدل ما تكون مثلا حزام أكتر على مستوى المدينة ليه بيكون حزام أكتر على مستوى النيبر. يعني يكون عندي منطقة سكنية صغيرة وعندها سنتر حتى وعندها حزام أكتر حواليها
ديزاين. فنحن يعني مشينا على المسار ده على اساس انه نحن نحس انه فعلا الخرطوم دي حقتنا.
I was very happy to look at these visions that this student has shown, as well as I'm very happy maybe to tell you that some of these people that you have seen in the video are already teaching staff at the University of Khartoum, a couple of them actually. So it's very interesting to look at them as a participant, as part of this exercise of developing a vision for the city, as well as looking at them as educators now at this point. So the visions that has been all developed, I'm not sure if you're seeing the slide now. Is it clear, the slides? Because it's not clear for me here. Okay. So
here, yeah.
Okay. So the visions that has been developed by all the stakeholders and the youth basically focus on looking at Khartoum city as a green city, trying to create sustainable public transportation, trying to look at creating walkable cities, creating green neighborhoods, looking at the city in a way that reflects its identity, a city with smart buildings and smart technologies, a city of tourism, a city of a unique architectural style, and a city with self-sufficiency and less dependency on other cities, a healthy city, a city of aware citizens, a city that reduce, reuse, and recycle its waste, a vibrant city, a renewable energy city, a city of multi-centers, and then a compact city. So all this vision has been developed in a way or another through the participatory process. What we did after that is we tried to combine all these visions into a certain tracks. And what we managed to do is we combine them into 5 main tracks. The first one has to do with visions related to urban form and transportation. And this includes the vision that looks at the walkable city, that looks at sustainable public transportation, that looks at the city with multi-centers, and then a city with smart growth. And then the visions related to the natural environment, which includes the green environment, a city that reuse and reuse its waste, and then a city of tourism, and then again a city a visions that related to building construction, architecture style. This includes a city of unique architecture style. It includes a city of tourism. It includes vibrant cities. And the 4th component is visions related to community health and well-being. This includes a healthy city, includes also a city that reuse, reduce, and recycle its waste, and it's a vibrant city. And then the last component is a vision related to resources conservation. And this is includes a city, again, that reuse and reuse its resources, and a compact city. What we see here is that many of the visions actually fit into more or less one of these groups. But basically the 5 domains of the visions here reflects all the outcomes of the workshops that we have we have done. So the last thing is the workshop outcomes, the third component. After we did the workshop, the youth has envisioned the city, and then they develop the visions. We ask them to try to look at ways to implement these visions. It's a vision, as I said, so we're not really looking at it as a planning exercise, but in order to have a realistic vision, you have to think about how you are going to implement it. So we ask them to implement the vision, and then they come up with some certain policies and frameworks that are necessary to realize these visions. So basically, the first one has to do with public participation and involvement. They very much consider looking at the process of involving the other people, and also the public awareness through continuous training, education, and involvement of all the stakeholders, including, of course, the policymakers. And again, the issue of policymakers at this point comes very much many times, because as I mentioned earlier, the process of participation in the planning process is not very much grounded into the planning system. So even the youth were actually aware of this. So that's why they mentioned that the public awareness should include even the policymakers. It's not just for the public. And then the last thing is increasing city green coverage through urban agriculture, edible landscape, and green belts. The second part also of the tools is to have a strong political will. The political will itself is considered as one of the very important issues that could safeguard the development of these and the realization of these visions. Also, they looked at the necessity to amend planning mandates, as planning has to be run through certain policies and regulations. And the last thing is the need to comprehensive yet integrated environmental policies. So these are the tools that come out through the youth participation in the process. Just to conclude, I think the visions that we tried to present here and the visions that we have seen are quite comprehensive. By comprehensive, I mean they managed to look at various levels of planning, various issues of planning and urban design. Although most of them were grounded into the neighborhood level, into the street design, into the centers of the streets, into the public spaces, into walkable neighborhood, but some of them actually have been even gone to the level of the regional planning. The challenges and vision also. The challenges and visions I just presented indeed should be treated with cautions. What I mean by cautions is that they just an exercise of trying to look at what the youth are looking at when it has to do with their future cities. So we cannot look at these visions as a basis of a new structure plan or a new master plan for the city. And this is basically because the sample is very limited, so it's not really comprehensive point of view for all the ideas that's coming from the youth. And the second thing has to do with also with some issues that were not really shown on the exercise itself. For example, the issue of housing, which is one of the biggest issues that's facing the urban communities in Sudan, has never been actually mentioned throughout the whole 3 workshops. Indeed, for the high school students, the issue of housing is not really a problem, but maybe for the university students and those who are about to graduate, it might be a problem. But if we look at the culture in Sudan, in which normally the family or the boys and girls stay at the family house until they get married, it's understandable that none of them actually mentioned the issue of housing as one of the challenges. So we tend to talk to politicians, to city managers and administrators, and I would like to conclude by these things. rather than those affected, which are the communities. The youth, in fact, have less knowledge than the city, than the others in the city. This is the perception that we have. But what we have seen from these workshops is that the youth have far more developed ideas and concepts of how to look at the cities. And for this, if public engagement is grounded at early stage, we could actually, we could look at it as has more chances to succeed. This is basically because public participation provided chances for empowering citizens. It does educate stakeholders, and it generates meaningful proposals and vision. People indeed need planning. Planning definitely needs people. So focus on those who left behind is very important for the city. And by left behind in this case, I mean the youth, because as I presented earlier, they actually quite a majority in the population in Sudan and Arab region and African region as well. Definitely more efforts are needed in Arab region to harness the potential of young people and help them to develop the best of their abilities. The need to focus on youth is even greater in the time of unrest, and by the time of unrest, I mean during the COVID-19 pandemic, because youth and young people are one of the most affected by this. So we cannot achieve anything without harmonized efforts to engage all stakeholders together. I'd like just to conclude by what Dr. Adil has mentioned earlier. The very interesting statement by Jane Jacobs is that the city can provide something for everyone only if it has been generated by everyone. So thank you very much.
It's 1 o'clock.
Back to you, Adil.
Thank you, Dr. Bahreldin. Thank you so much for this is a very interesting topic for what's going on in Khartoum and how you link your experience through your PhD journey in Tokyo in Japan, through many experiences you did there, and how this really brought it to Sudan, and you did kind of like culturation to fit the culture for the Sudani people. Now let's open the mic for the audiences. Let's have the question. I think Dr. Mohammed Abu Samra raised his hand. Dr. Mohammed, could you please give the question? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Ibrahim, for
your voice, Mohammed, your voice.
Okay.
Could you come closer? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. صباح الخير عليكم, and thank you, Dr. Ibrahim, for your interesting presentation, and it was really interesting. But I have a question about some comments and questions related to each other, which is related to the scale of planning. I mean, if you plan for the school, you can go to the school children and ask them for participation and so. But if you are talking about the city, then you might have talk with maybe more experienced stakeholders, for example, specialists in all specialties. That's number one. Number two, how could you select these? The selection process of these youth, how can you guarantee they represent the whole sector of youth in the city? I mean, I can see from your presentation that they are very well educated and they represent a single sector of the youth in the city. But how about the uneducated people, the silent groups, silent youth groups in the city? How can they be consulted, and how can they present their opinions about the city? That means that how can we guarantee that you cover all the youth groups in the city? Okay, and to cover all the backgrounds, not only the planners or the specialists in planning. That is my question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, should I respond or maybe?
Yes, please. Yes.
Okay, thank you, Muhammad, very much. In fact, I mentioned earlier at the beginning that this exercise was not considered as a basic of all-inclusive exercise to create a youth vision for the city of Khartoum. So we were very limited by the time as well as the budget that was provided for us. So this is why we only included 3 public schools in the process, and we also included 6 universities, public universities. But we did our best that in the process of mapping for the youth and selecting the youth, that especially for the schools, we look at the schools that are at the outer skirts of the city, and schools that are located in some of the remote areas. So we look at the schools in, one school is actually coming from Mayo. Mayo is considered one of the very low income areas in Khartoum city. It's a neighborhood that's dominated by migrants communities and internally displaced people due to several conflicts and armed conflicts in Khartoum. So indeed, it wasn't really inclusive for all the youth, and we cannot at all say that we tried to make it inclusive. What I tried to explain, maybe I failed to do it, is that the idea was to look at the youth, to look at what kind of visions that we have, and then this could help us to look at a better way to involve them in the planning process. And this is why we call it alternative vision. We're not trying to look at it as a way to do a new planning project. Rather, it's just an alternative way of visioning. For the second question, I think it's about why we not included more specialties. That has to do with this. The idea was just to facilitate. So our role is actually a facilitator, a mediator. We didn't really need to intervene. We didn't want even to intervene with the youth. Our interest was to look at what they have. But at the same time, we needed to look at the level of expertise and knowledge that the youth enjoys within the education system, and by that I mean the youth from the university students. Because for that specific group, we look at the students from architecture, urban planning, urban design, as well as environmental studies. For the other schools, for the school students, we just selected the students randomly. I understand the reason for the question, because basically if we look at the students of the architecture and urban planning schools, they definitely have the knowledge about how to look at the city, or at least that's what we thought. But the truth is that throughout the 3 different workshops, the visions that we get from the school students is equally important as the visions that we get from the university students. It's unfortunate that I didn't manage to present the videos that has to do with the workshop for the 2 different schools, the girls' schools and the boys' schools, because each one has 3 schools together from different backgrounds. But I presented my favorite vision, which is drawn by one of the students from high school. It's also coming from one of the remote areas. So they really showed a very knowledgeable minds of looking at the challenges that's facing the city, and also the ways they're looking the city forward, the future cities that they expected.
Thank you, Dr. Bahreldin. Thank you so much. All right, any other question we have here? Munir, please, the mic is yours.
السلام عليكم، يعطيكم العافية. كيف حالك يا دكتور؟ أنا هحكي سؤالي بالعربي، بس ممكن حضرتك تترجمه لو أي حد حب ياخذ ترجمة. والسؤال إذا ممكن طبعا.
تفضل منير، تفضل.
اوكي.
اتمنى انه
في انا السؤال عندي بينقسم من يعني أنا بدي أتكلم عن الوضع عندنا شوية في فلسطين في غزة. يعني إحنا عندنا المنطقة تبعتنا بتعاني من نزاعات، عندنا بتعاني من بطالة كتير كبيرة. يعني في وسط الشباب تقريبا 80% نسبة البطالة، وهذا رقم مهول طبعا. فإحنا بنواجه مشكلة في التخطيط مع الشباب، إنه ما في عندهم الدافعية، ما في عندهم الشغف للتخطيط، لأنه بالنسبة لهم المستقبل يعني ما في مستقبل. فكان سؤالي، هل واجهتوا نفس المشكلة هاي في المشروع تبعكم في السودان؟ لأنه شوية أنا بحس إنه أحيانا برضو الوضع شوية صعب، برضو مش هالاستقرار السياسي الكبير، وكيف تغلبتوا عليها؟ هذا الجزء الأول من السؤال. الجزء الثاني بسيط جدا، هل المشروع هذا تم تنسيق فيه مع الحكومة أو مع جهات ممكن تنفذه؟ لأنه صراحة المجهود اللي انعمل مجهود كتير كبير، وصراحة يعني خسارة هذا المجهود يضل يعني محطوط على الأرفف، ما تستغله مثلا جهة ممولة أو الحكومة السودانية لتنفيذه. وشكرا.
شكرا. عادل ممكن تترجم السؤال؟
Okay, so the first question is about that in Palestine right now the unemployment rate is really getting really high, and this is sending a message to the young generation. They got so disappointed. His question is, how did you manage to fight such a situation through this exercise? Is this a question, Munir, right? Munir, right?
مظبوط بالضبط. مظبوط.
Okay. The second question is about the slum area, or it's about Munir?
Coordination with the government.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yes. So let's start the first question. Yes.
Okay. Regarding the first question, as I mentioned earlier, it's I mean, youth they're really facing a very hard time in Sudan, and the majority of them are actually thinking just to migrate. It's not because of the involvement, but because of the many issues that we're facing currently in the country with this political uncertainty, economical challenges, and these kind of things. And the youth are the ones who are really affected by that. Added to that, the current pandemic, which makes a lot of youth actually out of education because of the poor access to internet, and that was reflected into that most of the public schools, including also the universities, were closed since March up to now. So 6 months is that they closed. So the youth are really very much affected by this. And when we try to approach the youth, the best way for us was to approach them formally. For high school students, we organized a meeting with the Ministry of Education. And then through the Ministry of Education, we managed to reach these schools, the selected schools. Of course, we did our best to have our own characteristics of the schools that we need them to participate in the process. But at the end, it's very difficult to endorse such kind of activity into high school. Extracurricular activities such as this one sometimes has been looked at as, I don't know how to say it, but it's not very much welcoming into the educational system in the high school. So we have to fight to make it happening. And in fact, there's a couple of guys in the Ministry of Education. They help us a lot to facilitate this and to contact the schools that we try to look at. Coming back into the students themselves, for the high school students, it wasn't really that difficult to solve the problem of being a little bit upset about the conditions in the country, and that might be reflected into the way they participate in the workshop itself. For them, the moment we started the project, the moment we started the workshop, they were very highly motivated, self-driven, and it's just the basic input that we did. The rest of the workshop was completely done by them. Even the wrapping up of the workshop, like compiling the papers, like cleaning the space, everything was done by themselves. And I think this is the essence of the participation itself, when the participant considers themselves as a part of the process. For them wasn't really a problem. But for high school students, for the university students, we felt that they are a little bit behind at the beginning. And this is why the workshop for the university took 2 days instead of 1 day. For the high school students, was just 1 day workshop. And 1 day, I mean 3 hours workshop. But for the university student, it was 2 days, the workshop itself. The first day was basically about ice breaking, as well as defining the challenges. And then the second one was about the vision. In a nutshell, for both of them, the tough conditions that the country is facing were not seen in the process itself. They were very dear to work on developing the vision. And I think maybe they have tried to find a way to channel all the negative environments and effects that they have through the process of generating the visions. For the second part, how we managed to coordinate with different kinds of government and whether this has been taken forward. The whole assignment as the whole project was actually funded by a private NGO, by an NGO. It was funded by the European Union itself, but the initiative was coming from this NGO. The involvement of the government was at the stage of defining the schools for the high school students, as well as getting permissions from the universities. And maybe we were lucky because at that time we were in the University of Khartoum, so it wasn't very difficult for us to choose the students from that specific university. We managed to contact also the other universities, even sometimes informally with them. So the whole process was between the NGOs and the educational facilities. It was never gone beyond that. We communicated, of course, the results of this workshop with our colleagues at different ministries, but it wasn't very much a project that has been endorsed by the government. And honestly, we are very much happy that maybe it goes this way, because for some reasons, the public is not very much trustful of the projects that comes from the government. I have done my PhD on this topic, which has to do with public involvement and participation in some of the projects that has been initiated in cities. Public in general are not very much have a big trust in the projects that's coming from the government. In the contrary, the projects that's coming from educational institutions and NGOs are very much welcome within the community.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bahreldin. We have a question from Fatima Yasiranim. She's asking a question saying that how to address the issue of slum urbanization that happened in Khartoum due to the issue of people coming from the suburb. She's raising her hand if she wants to add to the question.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Doctor, thank you for this interesting presentation. I'd like to ask about the slum urbanization in Khartoum, and how this issue could be solved by integrating public, as you have done in this issue of Islam urbanization, be solved through embracing other cities, Khartoum, or what we can do with this kind of of urbanization? This is my question.
Okay, thank you, Fatima.
Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Ibrahim, she's saying that how such an approach that you are presenting right now, how this can contribute to solve the problem of slum urbanization.
Yes, exactly.
Thank you.
I'm not sure if I will have an answer for that, because basically I think the problem of slums urbanization is a problem that has different dimensions. It has the dimensions that has to do with the general policy in the country, and I mean by that the wealth distribution and how the policy integrate different people and different cultures into the different economies.
Okay.
And so I'm not sure if I have the answer, but what I'm trying to say is that I do believe that public participation will definitely solve such kind of issue. And I'm just giving example by one of the areas that has been replanned as a part of Khartoum structure plan in 1995, if I remember very well. It was a slum area. Now it's in the middle of the city, but that area was replanned. Although the government didn't really very much respected the outcomes of the plans, but they have relocated the people into another place through a kind of participatory approach. And it's not really a full participation. By participation, I mean it's the NGOs and the government work together to try to give the community the capacity to build their new homes in the areas that they were relocated to assist them in that. So they didn't really participate in the decision-making process. They didn't really participate in the planning area, in the planning of their areas. They participated in learning how to build their new home, and it works. It works. Even they called it Al-Wazir Degas,
Okay.
called it Al-Wazir Degas, which is one of the areas in south of Khartoum. And they call it Al-Wazir Degas, I think, because Wazir Degas, that means the minister had made a mistake in English, which is something that they didn't expect, that they find this big land legally disposed to them as an alternative to that small piece of land that they have in the center of the city, which is not really legal. But the participation itself, I think, is the best way to look at these kind of issues, even if it has to be managed at the policy level, or at the planning level, or at the level where you need to involve the community.
Okay, thank you.
شكرا دكتور ابراهيم. دكتور عبد الحفيظ.
السلام عليكم. السلام عليكم.
وعليكم السلام دكتور.
Thank you, Dr. Ibrahim, because a very interesting issue, a very interesting topic. I don't have any specific question, but I have some comments about what you have presented. First of all, it's a very nice, a very good experience of having this workshop, of trying to have a clear vision about Khartoum, because we know that so far there is no clear vision by all the stakeholders, even the politicians, the public, all these things. And I think this procedure can be applied at a larger scale so that we can have a very clear vision about Khartoum, because we are really in need of this. From your experience, I noticed that the students have a very high level of ideas about the planning, the city of Khartoum, and a clear vision. Maybe, I don't know, they may have some experience about planning. I don't know. But this is, which is, I think, is very good and contributing to your experience. We know that it seems your choice about the vision is affected by your field of interest. You are interested in workability, design. I know this about Dr. Ibrahim. But in my opinion, I would choose the other alternative, the second one, which is showing that the whole view of the city. And it gives a very good idea about having centers, a secondary center of the city connected with transportation, and a very nice structure that has been illustrated by that student. And I think this gives a very strong image about Khartoum, because we know that Khartoum is a very complicated city now, and it has so many problems. There are so many problems, complicated problems about the planning of the city of Khartoum. We know that there are problems of squatting, problems of lack of services, problems of housing and transportation. All these has to be included, not to concentrate only on minor issues such as walkability and these things. We need to develop our city in a very, a very good way, because this is the vision which we need. And I don't know whether this can be applied really at a larger scale. It's very interesting. The methodology is very clear, and we can have very good results if you include a larger sectors of populations, giving their ideas, experiences. Well, I think this can be applied and will give very good results. I just wanted to give this idea about your comments about your work, and I think very high, a very high level of experience, high level of work that can be reproduced and repeated in some ways in future. Thank you very much, Dr. Ibrahim.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tahfir. All right, Dr. Ibrahim, there is a question. Then you can make any follow-up to what Dr. Abdelhafiz said, and you can answer at the same time the question that is coming by Merit.
Okay.
She's asking, would like to know whether it's possible to extend your research to make it tangible, visual in public spaces at the local level in order to invite greater public to reflect onto it. For example, proposing that create a small pilot exercise with the neighborhood scale in which youth can contribute and implement some of their ideas as a pilot.
Okay, thank you, Adil. In fact, one thing that I didn't mention, maybe it circled back to what Dr. Abdelhafiz just mentioned also, is just 3 weeks ago, I signed a contract with the Deanship of Scientific Research at the University of King Abdulaziz University to let's say, to do an improved version of this research here in Saudi Arabia, in Jeddah. And in fact, this time, we're not only looking at the general visions, but also we're looking at the street level, at the public space level. So we have a team that's working on this now. We are still at the stage of developing the methodology. So stay tuned. Maybe very soon you will hear about the other presentation about the case in Saudi Arabia. But we're looking at two things. We're looking at the same approach that we developed in Khartoum, which has to do with looking at the general vision at the larger scale. But at the same time, we're looking at a direct vision into the community level, into the street level, into public space level. And this is proved to be very crucial, especially during the time of the pandemic now, where looking at the neighborhood level and the local level activities and urban practices has proved to be very crucial and very essential for the development of the neighborhood. So I'm very enthusiastic and looking forward for the initiation of this project here in Jeddah. And I think definitely that's one part that we expecting to look at. But so far we still on the methodological process, so it's not yet completed. And for Dr. Abdelhafiz, I think also he put his fingers in a very important issue. I mentioned that one of the vision, and it was surprising for me, that is the only vision that looks at the city at the regional level. And I was surprised because honestly, I didn't expect that the students will look at the regional level, since most of their knowledge were related to where they live, where they learn, where they go for leisure and these kind of activities. But looking at the regional level, looking at the city from the wider perspective, proves that they have a very deep knowledge and understanding of how the city systems work together. And I agree with you, both of the visions that looks at the regional level or the local level are very important. But it was just one vision that looked at the regional level. That's why maybe I didn't manage to explain it very well in the presentation.
The question for Renette, that is it possible to, or she's proposing if this can be a small pilot exercise with a neighborhood scale to engage the youth?
Yeah. As I said, we just signed a contract to do a smaller version or maybe a bigger version of this project here in Jeddah. Generally now we have 3 recommendations, but now we ditch them all because we are trying to build a methodology through which we could choose actually 3 areas of real interest for the youth in Jeddah. And by areas, I mean small scale areas, which could be at the street level, the neighborhood park level, or the neighborhood square level. So we're working on this now, but it's definitely going to be part of this research. We will be working at the general level, which we will include the university students, the school students, to try to create general visions for the city, as well as we will look directly into the youth, regardless of their level of education. So at the street level, you will look at the youth who were there. Regardless if they live there, just by passing by, they will be part of this. We thought also of doing participatory research, participatory design, participatory planning. They will be involved in placemaking process at the street level. But we didn't yet, as I mentioned, we didn't yet decide where we are going to do this. But indeed, we were going to do it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ibrahim. Mona, please, you have the question. Feel free to speak Arabic and I will translate the English.
Yes, thank you for AMAKEN Placemaking for giving us this opportunity. It's a very interesting thing, and the topic that Mr. Ibrahim is talking, and the great work that he did in Khartoum, and how this amazing work is fine. I have only one question, and it's mainly about the management of the people who is coming from the rural areas, and how it can be adopted to the urban areas. There's a lot of people who's coming from the suburban areas and the rural areas. They're trying to come to the cities. They don't know the education of the the cities that already existed. So they basically try to do whatever they want. And we are planning for the cities where in Africa we have a big problem that challenges us as a Somali.
Mona, we cannot hear you. All right. Mona, we can't hear you. Okay, let's give the mic to Dr. Lobna. She has a question. Then we'll go back to Mona. Mona will be the last question. Dr. Lobna, please.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. أعتقد دلوقتي معناش حد بيتكلم بالإنجلش. سؤالي لدكتور إبراهيم هو مش سؤالي لدكتور إبراهيم، هو observation الحقيقة. أنا لاحظت في أغلب الكوميونتي أو القعدات اللي عملتها مع المجتمع للتصميم الفراغات العامة إنه أغلب المشتركين فيها فتيات وسيدات. فهو أنا فعلا خدت بالي وده observation حقيقي، ولا أنت كنت بتصور السيدات بس، ولا من كده إنه النساء هم الترو بليس ميكرز؟ مش عايزة أعمل يعني conclusion أسيبه لحضرتك، بس يا ريت تكلمني عن الاوبزرفيشن الواضحه جدا دي. طبعا انا مع ان النساء هم البليس ميكرز، بس اسمع رايك. اتفضل.
اوكي. هو حقيقه هو ده اللي حصل فعلا. يعني يمكن احنا لما اخذنا الاكزامبلز او الامثله بتاعتنا، احنا اخذنا 3 مدارس تاعت اولاد و3 مدارس تاعت بنات، دي للمدارس الثانويه يعني. بعد ذاك رحنا للجامعات. يمكن حتكوني مبسوطه جدا اذا انا قلت لك انه تقريبا في جامعه الخرطوم اللي هو في الوقت اللي حصل فيه الورشه دي 80% من الطلاب بتاعين العماره في الجامعه هم من النساء. فيعني يمكن الحكايه دي ملاحظه جدا حاليا يمكن في التعليم العالي في الجامعات السودانيه، انه الغالبيه العظمى من الطلاب هم من النساء، وبالتالي يمكن كان في سيطره بالنسبه لهم، خاصه فيما يتعلق بالورشتين الخاصات بالطلاب بتاع الجامعات. فيما يتعلق بالجزئيه الثانيه طبعا اصلا هي كانت 50-50 فيما يتعلق بالمدارس الثانويه، يعني المدارس الثانويه اصلا كان الطلاب لوحدهم والطالبات لوحدهم، وده نالو كان بطلب من الوزاره انه ما يحصل نوع من الخلط او الدمج ما بين الطلاب والطالبات مع بعض في بيئه واحده. لكن طبعا الجامعات هناك في السودان اصلا هي مختلطه، عشان كده ما كانت فيها مشكله. لكن الحقيقه انه الدور بتاع النساء دور قوي جدا في السودان. يعني انا ما بتكلم فقط عن الموضوع بتاع الورك شوب دي وبس، وانما حتى في الديسيجن ميكنج. ويمكن حتى على الثوره الاخيره اللي قامت دي، يعني الكونتريبيوشن بتاعت النساء فيها كانت كبيره جدا. فالاوبزرفيشن بتاعك صحيح وفي مكانه، واحنا سعيدين جدا انه
صحيح. اهم حاجه كونكلوجن.
احنا سعيدين جدا بانه يعني الدور بتاع الكنداكات او كما بنسميهم احنا، الكنداكه دي هي من المسميات بالنسبه ل التراديشنال ليدرز ايام الفراعنه في السودان، يعني في المملكه بتاعت كوشيت او كوش. الكلمه دي يمكن منتشره كثير جدا في السودان حاليا، واستخدموها يمكن بكثافه يعني في الفتره بتاعت الثوره دي. ففعلا يمكن في حضور نسائي كبير جدا في كل النشاطات، سواء كان لها علاقه بالتخطيط او النشاطات العامه في السودان يعني.
طيب اشكرك جدا على الاضافه الرائعه دي. وعايزه اسالك يا دكتور ابراهيم، من خلال بقى ان انت فعلا قابلت رجال قليلون ونساء كثيرات، هل في تندنسي مختلفه او ميول مختلفه في صناعه المكان بيزد على الجندر؟ يعني تندنسي بيزد او جندر بيزد تندنسي؟
في الكيس دي بالتحديد احنا ما حاولنا الايشوز بتاعت الجندر دي نحطها في حساباتنا. يمكن الكومباريزون كانت حتكون واضحه جدا اذا احنا خديناها فيما يتعلق بالمقارنه ما بين المخرجات بتاعت ورشه العمل بتاعت المدارس الثانويه الطلاب والطالبات. يعني يمكن فيما يتعلق بالجامعه، بالورشه بتاعت الجامعه، يمكن هي لانها اصلا كانت بارتيسيبيتوري في كل المكونات بتاعتها، فحتى الكونسبتس والديسيجنز وكده كانت ما بين الميل والفيميل، البويز والجيرلز الاثنين تشاركيه، يمكن ما كانت واضحه. ف honestly احنا we didn't look at this. لكن في very interesting research I will be happy to share it with you. I was actually يعني part من السوبرفايزرز. واحده من الطالبات بتاعني يمكن عملت الماستر سيسز بتاعتها في الامباكت بتاعت الجندر فاريشن على الديزاين بتاع الببليك سبيس في الووتر فرونت بتاعت الخرطوم. It was very interesting research. I'll be very happy to share it with you.
Thank you very much. شكرا جزيلا دكتور إبراهيم.
بارك الله.
شكرا دكتور إبراهيم. شكرا. منى, please, the mic is yours and you'll be the last. Thank you.
All right. السلام عليكم أستاذ إبراهيم وأماكن عامة. هذه فرصة سعيدة جدا. عندي فقط سؤال واحد للأستاذ إبراهيم، هو كيف نستطيع التعامل مع الناس اللي بيهاجروا من القرى ويجون للمدن الكبيرة، وهذا يعني عندنا big challenge for us as a Somali people, and they never try to understand what is called the rules and regulations of the cities. So they build wherever they want in the streets, and we have this the most challenging thing for us as architects. And basically we are few in Somalia as a general, and it's basically the thing that is how can we challenge this. Also the architects is a very small, so how you in Khartoum and Sudan, how you try to solve this issue and to aware people and how importance of the urban plan in our country is.
شكرا منى. إذا أنا فهمت السؤال صحيح، إنه كيف إحنا بنقدر نتعامل مع الأشخاص القادمين مثلا أو الجايين من الكونتري سايتس أو من السبيربس وعندهم كلتشر مختلفة وهم بيجوا بيحاولوا إنه يحصل نوع من الريفليكشن أو الانعكاس بتاع الكلتشر دي على الطريقة بتاعت الحياة بتاعتهم في المدينة. وإذا هو ده السؤال، أفتكر إنه المشكلة دي ما عندنا في السؤال، هو إحنا عندنا في السودان نفس الحكاية دي، لدرجة إنه في بعض الناس بدوا يسموها ترييف المدينة، باعتبار إنه أغلب الناس دي جايين من الريف وهم جايين داخلين في المدينة. وصراحة يمكن أنا حقول لك الرأي بتاعي قد يكون هو يعني مقنع بالنسبة لك ولا لا، لكن أنا بفتكر إنه المدينة هي should involve everyone بغض النظر عن إنه هو جاي من الريف ولا جاي من الحضر. والمدينة بتتبني بإنه يكون في نوع من التراكم بالنسبة للثقافات الموجودة فيها. بالتأكيد الناس اللي ممكن يكونوا جايين من الريف قد يكون عندهم نوع من العادات الما مقبولة بالنسبة للناس اللي ساكنين في المدينة، والعكس صحيح. لكن في النهاية لازم يكون في نوع من القبول ونوع من المرونة، لأنه في الآخر كل الثقافات دي حتتلاقح مع بعض وحتنتج الثقافة اللي هي بتشكل المدينة. يعني الحكاية بتاعت إنك تحاول تفرض سياسات بحيث إنك تقلل من العملية دي، أنا أفتكر هي ما بتعمل حاجة غير إنها بتقصي مكون أساسي من مكونات المدينة. فزي ما الناس عندها حق في إنها تعيش في المدينة، كل الناس الثانيين عندهم الحق في إنه يعيشوا في المدينة. يس عندها آثار سلبية، لكن جزء من الآثار السلبية دي ممكن الناس تتفاداه بإنه تدي الناس كلها الحقوق، والحقوق دي ذاتها تتبني على مجهود تشاركي. وفي الغالب أغلب السلوكيات اللي ممكن تكون ما إيجابية المرتبطة بالحكاية دي هي مرتبطة بعدم الوعي في قضايا محددة. فالمفاهيم التشاركية والتوجه التشاركي في حل المشكلات الزيدية بيضمن لك إنك أنت ما فقط بتحل المشكلة بتاعتك، وإنما بيحصل نوع من رفع الوعي بالنسبة للفئات بتاعت المجتمع كلها من خلال المجهود التشاركي اللي أنت بتقدميه من خلال البروسيس بتاعتك دي. ف يعني في 3 كلمات ممكن أقول لك الحل في المشاركة.
شكرا أستاذ.
شكرا دكتور إبراهيم. شكرا منى. Thank you so much. Right. Could everyone, if it's possible, to open your camera so we can take a picture for today's coffee break? Thank you everyone for today. I think today it was a very interesting topic. It's just a placemaking topic, and I think we had a lot of things to learn about what's happening in Sudan and what's happening also in, I think, through bringing the experience from Japan and bring it to Sudan. I think this is a very interesting experience to share with us. Thank you so much, Dr. Ibrahim. Thank you so much to everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Adi. Thank you, Dr. Ibrahim.